You already know the names of history's worst tyrants: Hitler, Stalin, Mao. But what if I told you there are others, just as ruthless, whose names have been etched into the pages of history for their sheer wickedness? This list isn't about the usual villains. These are the 10 most hated people in the Bible, figures whose betrayals, cruelty, and defiance of God made them infamous. And trust me, as we go down this list, their actions only get worse. You ready? Let's go. Judas Iscariot, 33 AD, the most infamous traitor in history. Judas Iscariot secured his place in eternal condemnation when he sold out Jesus Christ for 30 pieces of silver. A disciple turned deceiver, he sat at the Last Supper, feigning loyalty while plotting with the chief priests to hand over his master. In the darkness of Gethsemane, he sealed his betrayal with a kiss, a symbol of ultimate hypocrisy. His treachery set into motion the brutal crucifixion of the man he once followed. But his silver coins became a curse rather than a prize. Overcome with guilt, he hurled the blood money into the temple and hanged himself in despair. His name became a byword for betrayal, reviled across centuries as the man who sold his soul and doomed himself to infamy. Pharaoh of the Exodus, unknown, c. 13th-15th century BC, ruthless ruler of Egypt who defied God and enslaved the Israelites. Pharaoh's heart was as hardened as the bricks his captives were forced to make. Confronted by Moses and warned of divine wrath, he scoffed at the God of Israel and tightened his grip on his slaves, demanding they produce more with less. When the Nile turned to blood, when frogs, locusts, and darkness plagued his land, he refused to yield. Even as his people suffered, he remained obstinate, his pride outweighing their misery. Only when the angel of death struck down his firstborn did he finally relent, but not for long. Overcome with fury, he led his chariots in a vengeful pursuit, chasing the fleeing Israelites into the Red Sea. But arrogance turned to terror as the waters, once miraculously parted, came crashing down, swallowing Pharaoh and his army in a watery grave. His defiance left a legacy of destruction, his downfall a warning against challenging the will of God. King Herod the Great, 73-4 BC, a tyrant consumed by paranoia and cruelty. Herod the Great ruled Judea with an iron fist, leaving behind a legacy of bloodshed and terror. A master of political intrigue, he eliminated rivals with ruthless efficiency, including his own wife and sons, whom he suspected of plotting against him. But his most infamous atrocity came with the birth of Jesus Christ. Hearing of a newborn King of the Jews, Herod saw only a threat to his throne. In a desperate attempt to erase the prophecy, he ordered the massacre of the innocents, a brutal slaughter of all male infants in Bethlehem. Mothers wept as soldiers tore babies from their arms, the streets running red with the blood of the innocent. Yet his efforts were in vain. The child he sought to destroy escaped, and Herod's name was forever cursed. His death was as wretched as his life, stricken with disease, racked with pain, and loathed by his own people. Even in death, his paranoia endured, for he left orders to execute prominent citizens upon his passing so that the nation would mourn. His name became synonymous with tyranny, a ruler who sought to kill a king, but instead sealed his own infamy. Cain, unknown pre-flood era. The firstborn of humanity and the first to spill innocent blood, Cain's name became a symbol of envy, rage, and fratricide. Born to Adam and Eve, he and his brother Abel were tasked with making offerings to God. When Abel's sacrifice was accepted while his own was rejected, Cain's heart burned with jealousy. Rather than seek redemption, he let resentment fester until it became murderous intent. Luring his unsuspecting brother into the field, Cain struck him down in cold blood, staining the earth with humanity's first homicide. When confronted by God, he responded not with remorse but defiance, uttering the infamous words, "Am I my brother's keeper?" As punishment, he was marked and cast out, condemned to wander the earth as a cursed fugitive. His descendants bore the weight of his legacy, a lineage of corruption and violence. In killing his brother, Cain not only shattered his own family, but became the eternal warning of unchecked envy and the devastating cost of sin. Jezebel, 9th century BC, the queen whose name became a curse. Jezebel was a ruthless idolater who drenched Israel in blood and sin. A Phoenician princess, she married King Ahab and brought with her the worship of Baal, turning the kingdom from God to pagan abominations. With an iron grip on her weak-willed husband, she orchestrated the murder of prophets, silencing anyone who stood in her way. When Naboth refused to sell his vineyard, she forged lies, had him falsely accused, and watched as he was stoned to death, just so Ahab could seize his land. But her reign of terror met divine judgment. The prophet Elijah declared her doom. and years later his prophecy came true. As Jehu rode into Jezreel, she painted her face and looked down from her window, but her seductive power had faded. Her own eunuchs, tired of her tyranny, cast her down, and her body was trampled under Jehu's horses. By the time the dogs were done, nothing remained but her skull, hands, and feet, her legacy reduced to dust. Her name still echoes as a warning against corruption, arrogance, and the fate of those who defy God. King Ahab, 9th century BC. Weak-willed, corrupt, and utterly spineless, King Ahab of Israel became the puppet of one of the most wicked queens in history, his wife, Jezebel. Under her influence, he abandoned the God of Israel, erecting altars to Baal and plunging his kingdom into idolatry. But Ahab was not just a passive ruler, he was a willing participant in evil. He watched as Jezebel slaughtered prophets. He sulked like a spoiled child when Naboth refused to sell his vineyard, and he eagerly took possession after his wife had the innocent man murdered. Confronted by the prophet Elijah, Ahab was declared the most wicked king to ever rule Israel, a man who had sold himself to do evil. Though he briefly repented, his downfall was sealed. In battle, disguised in a futile attempt to escape fate, a stray arrow found its mark, and Ahab bled out in his chariot. As his body was brought back to Samaria, dogs licked his blood, the very fate Elijah had foretold. His reign was one of disgrace, his legacy one of weakness and wickedness, a cautionary tale of a man who let his lust for power and his wife's ruthless ambition lead him to ruin. Nebuchadnezzar II, c. 634 to 562 BC, the conqueror of nations and destroyer of Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar II was a king whose arrogance knew no bounds. Ruling Babylon at the height of its power, he crushed the kingdom of Judah, burned Solomon's temple to the ground, and dragged thousands of Israelites into captivity. His cruelty was legendary. He blinded King Zedekiah after forcing him to watch the execution of his sons, and he threw 3 Hebrew men into a fiery furnace for refusing to worship his golden idol. His empire was a monument to his own vanity, and he saw himself as a god among men. But his arrogance met divine judgment. The same God he defied humbled him in the most humiliating way, turning him into a beast. Stripped of his sanity, Nebuchadnezzar wandered the wild, eating grass like an ox, his nails growing like claws, his once mighty intellect reduced to madness. Only after years of humiliation did he finally acknowledge the God of heaven, regaining his throne but forever marked by his downfall. Though he ruled one of history's greatest empires, his story remains a warning. No king, no matter how powerful, can stand against the judgment of God. Haman the Agagite, 5th century BC. The architect of genocide and the embodiment of arrogance, Haman rose to power as the chief minister of the Persian Empire under King Xerxes, Ahasuerus. Obsessed with his own importance, he demanded absolute reverence. But one man refused to bow, Mordecai, a Jew. Enraged, Haman's hatred grew beyond Mordecai alone. He plotted to annihilate the entire Jewish people. Deceiving the king, he secured an edict to wipe them out in a single day, reveling in his impending massacre. But his arrogance blinded him to his downfall. Queen Esther, a Jew herself, exposed his wicked scheme before the king, and in a dramatic reversal of fate, Haman was hanged on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. His wealth was seized, his name became a curse, and his attempt at genocide turned into a celebration of survival, Purim. His downfall was swift, proving that pride, hatred, and a thirst for power led only to destruction. Absalom, c. 1000 BC, the treacherous son who turned against his own father, Absalom was Israel's golden boy, handsome, charismatic, and dangerously ambitious. But beneath his charm lurked a heart filled with pride and vengeance. After his sister Tamar was violated by their half-brother Amnon, Absalom took justice into his own hands, orchestrating Amnon's murder and fleeing into exile. When he returned, his thirst for power only grew. Slowly, he stole the hearts of the Israelites, whispering promises of better leadership until he was ready to strike. In a stunning act of betrayal, Absalom declared himself king, forcing his father, King David, to flee Jerusalem. To cement his claim, he publicly defiled his father's concubines on the palace rooftop, a final insult to the man he sought to overthrow. But his rebellion was short-lived. In battle, as he fled on his mule, his long, flowing hair His pride and symbol of beauty became his downfall, caught in the branches of an oak tree. Helpless, he dangled as David's men found him, piercing him through with spears. His body was tossed into a pit, unburied, his legacy one of betrayal, wasted potential, and the tragic end of a son who sought to rise above his father but instead fell to disgrace. Pontius Pilate, unknown, c. 39 AD. The Roman governor whose name became forever linked to history's greatest injustice. Pontius Pilate had the power to save an innocent man, but instead he condemned him to die. As prefect of Judea, he ruled with brutality, crushing Jewish uprisings with bloodshed and cruelty. But his most infamous act came when Jesus of Nazareth stood before him, falsely accused. Pilate knew the charges were baseless. His own wife even warned him to have nothing to do with this righteous man. But fear and political pressure outweighed justice. Desperate to appease the bloodthirsty crowd, he offered to release either Jesus or the murderer Barabbas. When the mob chose Barabbas, Pilate symbolically washed his hands, pretending to absolve himself of guilt. But no water could cleanse the stain. He ordered the crucifixion of Christ, sealing his place in infamy. History remembers him as the weak-willed governor who bowed to the will of the masses, delivering the Son of God to death. His fate remains a mystery. Some say he was exiled and died in disgrace. Others claim he went mad, haunted by the blood of the man he failed to save. Thank you for watching. It's important to learn about these notorious figures from the Bible, not just as history, but as lessons in what happens when pride, betrayal, and evil go unchecked. Their stories serve as warnings, showing the consequences of turning away from righteousness. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. I read and appreciate all your comments. Let me know which of these figures shocked you the most. Have a great day.